What happens when one of Britain's most reserved and private actors completely shatters his calm demeanor on live television? It only took 23 seconds for Rowan Atkinson to go from polite guest to explosive confrontation in what might be the most shocking moment the Lorraine Kelly Show has ever witnessed. Before we dive into this absolute chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Last night's episode of The Lorraine Kelly Show was supposed to be a gentle conversation about Rowan Atkinson's illustrious career. Instead, it turned into an absolute train wreck that had the entire studio in shock. What started as friendly morning chat between Atkinson and host Lorraine Kelly quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable and heated confrontations in British television history. The morning began with all the warmth and charm that the Lorraine Kelly Show is known for. The studio was bright and welcoming, the iconic orange sofa positioned perfectly under the lights. Rowan Atkinson walked onto the set to enthusiastic applause from the studio audience. He was dressed impeccably in a well-tailored suit, looking every bit the distinguished British actor. His demeanor was reserved, as always, with that characteristic slight awkwardness that made him so endearing to audiences worldwide. He shook hands with Lorraine, exchanged brief pleasantries, and settled into the sofa with a polite smile. "Rowan Atkinson, welcome to the show," Lorraine said, her Scottish accent warm and inviting, her signature brightness on full display. "It's absolutely lovely to have you here. How are you today?" "I'm very well, thank you, Lorraine," Atkinson replied, his voice measured and cultured, every syllable carefully articulated in that distinctive way of his. "It's a pleasure to be here, though I must admit, I'm not entirely comfortable with morning television. I'm much more of an evening person, you see." The audience laughed at his gentle self-deprecation. Lorraine smiled warmly, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Well, we're delighted you made the effort. Now, you've had such an incredible career. From Blackadder to Mr. Bean to Johnny English. You've made millions of people laugh across generations. What's that been like for you?" Atkinson shifted slightly, his discomfort with praise evident. "It's been quite extraordinary, really. I never set out to become this sort of cultural icon, if I may be so bold as to use that term. I simply wanted to perform, to explore comedy in its various forms. Mr. Bean, in particular, was an experiment in physical comedy that somehow resonated globally. It's been gratifying, if occasionally overwhelming." "You're being modest," Lorraine said with a knowing smile, her hands gesturing expressively. "Mr. Bean is recognized in every corner of the world. Children who don't speak English understand Mr. Bean. Adults who've never heard of Blackadder know who Mr. Bean is. That's a remarkable achievement. How does it feel to have created something so universally understood?" "Perhaps," Atkinson nodded thoughtfully, his fingers interlaced in his lap, his expression contemplative. "Though I sometimes wonder if the character has overshadowed everything else I've done. There's a certain irony in creating something so successful that it becomes both your greatest triumph and your most persistent shadow. I'm proud of Mr. Bean, naturally, but I've also played Shakespearean roles, done dramatic work, explored other facets of comedy. Yet when people see me on the street, they expect me to pull funny faces. That must be frustrating," Lorraine said sympathetically, leaning back slightly. "To be so identified with one character." "Frustrating is perhaps too strong a word," Atkinson said carefully. "It's simply the reality of having created something that resonated so powerfully. But yes, there are moments when I wish people could see beyond the rubber-faced comedian to the actor who's tried to do more than that." "Well, let's talk about that more," Lorraine said eagerly. "Let's talk about some of your other work. Blackadder is considered one of the greatest British comedies ever made. The writing, the performances, the historical satire. What are your memories of that time? What was it like working on something that brilliant?" Atkinson's eyes lit up slightly, a rare show of enthusiasm breaking through his reserved demeanor. Blackadder was a joy to make, truly. The writing was superb. Genuinely superb. Richard Curtis and Ben Elton created scripts that were both intellectually sophisticated and hilariously funny. That's a difficult balance to strike. And the cast was extraordinary. Working with Tony Robinson, who played Baldric, with Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry and Miranda Richardson. Those were remarkable times. We were pushing boundaries, being subversive, while still being accessible to mainstream audiences. That's the sweet spot of comedy, I think. Making people laugh, while also making them think. The wordplay in Blackadder was extraordinary, Lorraine added, nodding enthusiastically. The insults, the historical references, the clever turns of phrase. Did you appreciate that at the time? Or has it grown on you over the years? Oh, I appreciated it immensely at the time, Atkinson said, his voice warming with the memory. Reading those scripts was a pleasure. Every line was crafted. Every joke had layers. You could watch an episode multiple times and catch new things. That's the mark of great writing. And performing it was equally rewarding because the material gave you so much to work with. The conversation flowed comfortably for several more minutes, the atmosphere warm and engaging. They discussed his early days in comedy, performing in university revues at Oxford, where he met future collaborators, his transition from theater to television in the late 70s. Atkinson talked about his love of engineering and cars, his fascination with mechanics and precision, how he saw comedy as almost mathematical in its construction, requiring exact timing and precision. He shared a story about accidentally setting fire to a prop during the filming of a Blackadder episode, causing a brief panic before everyone realized it was harmless, just some smoldering fabric that was quickly extinguished. He described working with horses on the set of Blackadder Goes Forth, how they were unpredictable and sometimes more difficult to work with than any human actor. The audience laughed warmly, enjoying these glimpses into the making of a beloved show. The atmosphere was pleasant, professional, exactly what a morning chat show should be. Then Lorraine shifted the conversation. Rowan, I want to ask you about something that's been discussed quite a bit recently, Lorraine said, her tone becoming more serious, more pointed, the warmth draining from her voice. You've been vocal about certain issues related to comedy and what some people call cancel culture. You've spoken out about censorship and sensitivity in modern comedy. You've made some quite strong statements in interviews and articles. Some people have praised you for it, calling you brave and principled, but others have been quite critical, saying you're out of touch. Can you talk about that? Atkinson's expression became more guarded, his posture stiffening slightly, his hands moving to grip the armrests of the sofa. I have expressed concerns about the direction comedy seems to be taking, yes. I believe there's an increasing tendency toward censoriousness that's detrimental to the art form. Comedy requires freedom to explore uncomfortable territory, to push boundaries, to offend sometimes. Without that freedom, it withers. It becomes bland and toothless. But don't you think there are some boundaries that should exist? Lorraine pressed, her voice taking on a challenging edge, leaning forward with her elbows on the desk. Some jokes that cross lines that shouldn't be crossed? Some things that are just harmful rather than funny? Things that hurt people rather than entertain them? Of course there are boundaries, Atkinson replied, his voice careful and measured, each word chosen deliberately. Common decency, basic respect for human dignity. But the question is, who decides where those boundaries are, and whether those boundaries have become so restrictive that genuine comedy becomes impossible? The line between edgy and offensive is subjective, and it seems to be moving constantly. Who decides? Lorraine repeated, leaning forward even more. Don't you think marginalized communities, who are often the targets of jokes, should have a say in what's acceptable? Don't you think their feelings matter? Don't you think the people who are hurt by these jokes deserve to be heard? Atkinson's jaw tightened perceptibly, his famous elasticity replaced by rigid tension. Everyone's feelings matter, Lorraine. Of course they do. But comedy cannot be dictated by the most easily offended members of society. If it were, we'd have no comedy at all. Everything offends someone. Every joke has a target, and that target will inevitably be offended. That's the nature of comedy. But there's a difference between offensive comedy and comedy that punches down at vulnerable people. Lorraine countered, her voice gaining intensity, her Scottish accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions rose. Between being edgy and being cruel. Between making people think and making people hurt. Don't you see that distinction? Don't you understand that some comedy causes real harm? I see that distinction very clearly, Atkinson said, his voice becoming firmer, losing some of its measured quality. But I also see that the definition of punching down has become so broad, so expansive, that almost any joke can be categorized as such by someone. And I see that comedians are increasingly afraid to take risks, afraid to explore certain topics, afraid to push boundaries, because they fear the mob that will come for them on social media. The mob? Lorraine's eyebrows raised sharply, her expression one of disbelief. You mean people who are hurt by harmful jokes? People who are tired of being the punchline? People who are expressing their legitimate feelings about content that affects them? That's what you call a mob? I mean people who seek to silence voices they disagree with, Atkinson said, his usual reserve cracking more visibly now, his voice rising slightly. People who believe their personal discomfort should dictate what art can be created, what jokes can be told, what topics can be explored. That's not progress, Lorraine. That's not compassion. That's authoritarianism, wrapped in the language of compassion. It's censorship, disguised as caring. The atmosphere in the studio changed dramatically, as if someone had flipped a switch. The warmth evaporated instantly, replaced by tension that you could almost feel in the air, thick and oppressive. The audience had gone quiet, all laughter and warmth gone, sensing that this was no longer a friendly chat, but something more confrontational, more uncomfortable. That's quite a strong statement, Lorraine said, her voice sharp now, all pretense of friendliness gone. You're comparing people who speak out against harmful comedy to authoritarians? You're saying that marginalized people expressing hurt are equivalent to dictators? That's a remarkable leap, Rowan. I'm comparing the impulse to control speech, to dictate acceptable expression, to historical attempts at censorship, Atkinson clarified, but his voice was rising slightly, his control slipping. Whether it comes from the left or the right, from governments or from activists, censorship is censorship, and it's dangerous. It's always dangerous. History teaches us that. But this isn't about censorship, Lorraine insisted, her professional composure starting to slip, her face beginning to flush. This is about basic human decency, about not using comedy as a weapon against people who are already struggling, already marginalized, already hurting, about recognizing that words have consequences, that jokes have impact, that comedy can cause real damage to real people. Words do have consequences, Atkinson agreed, his voice hardening, becoming steelier, which is why we must protect the freedom to use them. You speak of decency, but who defines it? You? The government? Twitter activists? That's the fundamental question you're avoiding. That's what you refuse to address. Who gets to decide what's decent and what's not? And what happens when those people are wrong? I'm not avoiding anything, Lorraine shot back, her voice rising now, matching his intensity. I'm asking you to acknowledge that your position comes from a place of privilege, that it's easy to defend offensive comedy when you're not the one being hurt by it, when you're not the target, when you don't have to deal with the consequences of these jokes in your daily life. Privilege? Atkinson's eyes flashed with genuine anger now, a rare display from the normally controlled performer. You're going to lecture me about privilege? I've worked my entire life to hone my craft, to perfect my art. I've faced rejection, criticism, failure. I've put in decades of work to get where I am. Don't reduce everything to identity politics and privilege. Don't dismiss my entire career and my arguments by throwing that word at me. The tension was unbearable now, the air in the studio thick with it. The camera zoomed in, capturing every moment of the confrontation, every flash of anger, every tight expression. The crew stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this explosive moment play out. Identity politics? Lorraine's voice was incredulous now, her face flushing deeper red. That's what you call caring about people? That's what you call recognizing that some groups have been systematically marginalized, systematically hurt by jokes that demean them? That's what you reduce it to? Identity politics? That's what I call reducing complex artistic and philosophical questions to simplistic political slogans, Atkinson said, his voice cold and cutting, each word precisely delivered like a verbal scalpel. You've brought me here under false pretenses. I thought we were discussing my career, celebrating my work, having a pleasant conversation about comedy and craft. Instead, I find myself in a political debate where I'm expected to recant my views, to apologize for believing in artistic freedom. False pretenses? Lorraine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, the sound jarring in the tense silence. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling slightly. I'm asking you about things you've said publicly, things you've chosen to make part of your public persona, things you've written articles about, given interviews about. If you can't defend your positions when challenged, if you fall apart the moment someone questions you, that's not my fault. That's yours. Atkinson stood as well, his composure fracturing completely now, his famous control evaporating. I can defend my positions perfectly well, but I'm not going to sit here and be accused of privilege and insensitivity and cruelty by someone who clearly has no understanding of what comedy is, why it matters, or what it costs to create it. By someone who reduces art to politics. I understand comedy, Lorraine said, her voice shaking with anger, her professional mask completely gone. I've been in entertainment my entire career. I understand the difference between being funny and being cruel, between making people laugh and making people hurt. Apparently, you don't. Apparently, you're so wrapped up in your artistic freedom that you can't see the damage it causes. That's absurd, Atkinson said, his voice rising to a level rarely heard from him, shocking in its intensity. I've dedicated my life to comedy. I've studied it, practiced it, mastered it. I've performed it in theaters, on television, in films. And you, what? Host a morning chat show and think that qualifies you to judge what comedy should be? To lecture me about my craft? The audience gasped collectively. This was unprecedented. Rowan Atkinson, the reserved cerebral performer known for his measured responses and careful articulation, was losing his temper on live television. His face was flushed, his voice loud, his hands gesturing sharply. How dare you? Lorraine said, her voice low and dangerous, vibrating with suppressed fury. How dare you dismiss what I do? I've been in this industry for decades. I've worked my way up from nothing. I've built this show from scratch. I've interviewed thousands of people. And you stand there and dismiss it all because I dare to question your precious artistic freedom? Then perhaps you should focus on your show instead of trying to police comedy. Atkinson shot back, his voice cutting. Perhaps you should interview your guests instead of ambushing them with political interrogations designed to make them look bad. Perhaps you should do your job instead of trying to be some kind of cultural arbiter. Ambush? Lorraine's voice was shrill now, losing all control. You're the one who's been making public statements about these issues for years. You're the one who's positioned yourself as some kind of defender of comedy against the forces of censorship. I'm simply asking you to explain yourself, to defend your position, to engage with the criticism. If you can't do that, if you fall apart the moment someone challenges you, maybe your position isn't as strong as you think it is. I'm not falling apart, Atkinson said, but his voice was shaking with barely controlled fury. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'm refusing to participate in this farce. You've turned what should have been a pleasant conversation about my work into a political hit piece. You've decided I'm some kind of villain for defending artistic freedom, and nothing I say will change your mind because you're not actually listening. You're not actually interested in dialogue. You're interested in performing your outrage. I am listening, Lorraine insisted, her voice rising even higher. I'm just not agreeing. There's a difference. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm telling you it's wrong. I'm telling you that your position is harmful, that it defends comedy that hurts people, that it prioritizes your comfort over other people's pain. No, you're not listening, Atkinson said firmly, his voice gaining strength and certainty. You're waiting for your chance to attack again. You're performing for your audience, showing them how woke you are, how progressive you are, by taking down the privileged, white male. It's theater, but it's not conversation. It's not dialogue. It's prosecution. Oh, so now I'm not genuine? Lorraine's face was scarlet now, her voice cracking with emotion. Now my concerns are just performance? Now I'm just being politically correct? That's convenient for you, isn't it? Anyone who disagrees with you is just performing, just being politically correct, just following the mob. You can dismiss everyone who challenges you by saying they're not genuine. When they use the same tired talking points and refuse to engage with the actual arguments, yes, Atkinson said, his voice cold and precise. When they reduce everything to identity and privilege and feelings, when they can't distinguish between actual harm and mere discomfort, when they treat subjective offense as objective wrongdoing, then yes, it's performance. It's political theater masquerading as concern. Get out, Lorraine said suddenly, her voice cutting through the studio like a knife, sharp and final. Get off my show, right now. If you can't have a civil conversation, if you're going to insult me and what I do, if you're going to dismiss my concerns and my questions, then leave. Just leave. Atkinson stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, a mixture of anger, disappointment, and perhaps a touch of vindication. Then he reached for his microphone, pulling it off with deliberate, controlled movements, his fingers steady despite the fury coursing through him. With pleasure, he said, his voice quiet but filled with cold fury, more threatening in its calmness than any shout. This has been one of the most unpleasant experiences of my professional life, and I've had some unpleasant experiences. You should be ashamed of yourself, Lorraine. You've used your platform to attack a guest for having opinions you disagree with. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just bullying dressed up as social consciousness. I'm not the bully here, Lorraine said, but her voice wavered now, uncertainty creeping in for the first time. You're the one defending harmful comedy. You're the one who can't see beyond your own perspective. You're the one who refuses to acknowledge that your position hurts people. My perspective is that art requires freedom, Atkinson said, his voice gaining strength, becoming more forceful and clear. That comedy dies when it's subjected to political correctness and social pressure. That offense is subjective and cannot be the arbiter of what's acceptable. That feelings, however genuine, cannot dictate what artists create. If that makes me a villain in your eyes, so be it. I'd rather be a villain with principles than a coward who bends to every wind of fashionable opinion. He dropped the microphone onto the orange sofa, the sound amplified in the tense silence. You invited me here to promote your show, to add credibility to your program, Atkinson continued, his voice sharp and precise. Instead, you've used me as a political prop. You've ambushed me with loaded questions and then acted outraged when I defended my positions. This isn't how you treat guests. This isn't how you conduct interviews. This is beneath you, or at least it should be. Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but Atkinson held up a hand. I'm done, he said simply. I won't be spoken to this way. I won't be lectured about comedy by someone who fundamentally misunderstands its purpose and power. And I certainly won't sit here and be made into a villain for believing in artistic freedom. With that, Rowan Atkinson turned and walked off the Lorraine Kelly Show set. His steps were measured and controlled, his back straight, every inch the dignified British gentleman, even in his fury. The cameras followed him as he disappeared through the studio doors, leaving behind stunned silence. Lorraine stood at the desk, her chest heaving, her face still flushed with anger and perhaps a touch of embarrassment. The audience sat frozen, some people with their mouths open, others looking at each other in disbelief. The crew remained motionless, unsure what to do next. A producer rushed onto the set, whispering urgently in Lorraine's ear. She nodded stiffly, then turned to face the camera, attempting to compose herself. "We need to take a break," she said, her voice tight and strained. "We'll be right back." The screen cut to commercial, but not before capturing one final shot of the empty orange sofa and the discarded microphone. Silent witnesses to one of the most explosive confrontations in morning television history. What should have been a celebration of a legendary career had turned into a referendum on comedy, censorship, and the limits of acceptable discourse. Rowan Atkinson, one of Britain's most beloved performers, had been pushed to his breaking point and had chosen to walk away rather than continue a conversation he saw as fundamentally dishonest. The interview was over. The confrontation was done, and the Lorraine Kelly Show would never be quite the same.